How's it going, you guys? Welcome. Mornin'Cup. We start today off with Joe Biden's declaration of war against the coronavirus. So it turns out that Joe Biden has launched a 7-point plan in which he intends to battle the coronavirus and achieve results that have not been anticipated before. As a matter of fact, the United States is facing an all new wave of the coronavirus with more cases every single day and more deaths recorded every single day. The coronavirus is by no means over and is still running rampant on a global scale. So, this 7-step program initiated by the Biden government is apparently much required by the United States right now. As a matter of fact, the Biden government has also gone off its way to state that it might require people traveling from outside of the United States to develop a negative COVID test and a 14-day quarantine period. Nevertheless, we move on to Brazil, and Brazil has completely been overcome by the sheer dominance of this new variant that is running rampant across the nation. As a matter of fact, the nation of Brazil has not seen such massive deaths and such massive influx of infection in recent history, except for the bubonic plague, apparently. But the issue doesn't stop there. The issues reside to the fact that Pfizer has now put out a statement that it is facing huge logistical issues as well as manufacturing issues when it comes to developing the vaccine. Certain nations have decided to vouch other companies in their vaccines, such as the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines, but the issues still run prevalent, considering that Brazil is not one of the economically dominant nations over there, then indulge in some kind of a bidding war, if you will. This is exactly the kind of thing that the WHO chief was warning about. Nationalism and vaccine nationalism, as opposed to understanding the threat on a global scale. We move on to yet another earthquake in the Philippines. This is the third surge earthquake in the past 2 weeks. No tsunami warnings were initiated, no loss of life reported yet. But the point of the matter is that the Philippines is facing some bad earthquake season all of a sudden. We move on to a major story of the day, and that is Google versus Australia. Now I'm going to read out the official statements put out by the PM of Australia as well as spokesperson for Google said. Now, Google has threatened to remove its search engine from Australia over the nation's attempt to make its tech giant share royalties with media. That means the articles that pop up once you search for certain Google subjects that are reported by whatever media organization might have reported them in the first place, Google is now under obligation to pay these news organizations as well as websites for making their results pop up when Google search is used. As a matter of fact, these media companies have been vouching for this for a long period of time, and now the Australian government has finally complied. Australia is introducing a landmark law to make Google, Facebook, as well as potential other social media websites or search engines pay media outlets for portraying their news content. The United States tech giant Google has fought back, however, and the official statement that they put out is that if this version of this code of the new law were to come into place, it would give us no real choice but to stop making Google search available in Australia. This is the official statement put out by Google. Now, the PM of Australia, in response to this statement, has said that we do not yield to threats. Turns out that this issue is running a little hot for now. Australia is hell-bent on putting this law through, and Google is hell-bent on not wanting to share any speck of the revenue. If Australia successfully goes ahead with this law and Google does not have a choice but to stay in the country, it just opens a gateway for numerous other nations to follow suit, thereby completely taking away Google's entire agenda of profitability margins. We move on to Japan. Japan is hell-bent on hosting the Olympic Games, even though the new various variants that have been found there, 3 in total, are still running rampant. There is wide outcry amongst the people of Japan stating that the Olympic Games at a time like this isn't priority, yet the government is still hell-bent on making sure that the games are held. Now, another thing that this could be stemming from is the fact that the sheer economic impact that the pandemic has had on a global scale, Japan has not been an exception from that. Japan is one of the world's largest tourist places, and this pandemic has left it with nothing. We don't understand the significance of the economic impact in Japan, but we also understand the fact that the economy brought in by the sheer presence of the Olympics is not to be neglected. Hence why maybe Japan's government is taking the stance that it's currently taking. We move on to South Africa, and a South African variant of the coronavirus that is now present in more than 12 different nations might just be resistant to the vaccines. Now, this is still a developing story, so by no means is any of this a statement. But the following states that a study dictated that the evidence is building up that the mutations of the coronavirus and the mutations that are emerging on a global scale are already prevalent. As a matter of fact, these are escaping antibodies from previous infections. Alex Sigel, a virologist of the African Health Research Institute and the Max Planck Institute of Infection Biology, has told CNN, and this is their official statement, that it is concerning. It is unclear whether this means someone would be vulnerable to the new variant if they already had COVID 19, or what this might mean for people that have already been vaccinated, thereby completely opening the Pandora's box when we try to understand that whether this infection rate is going to stay with one virus variant, or is this going to completely evolve around the spectrum and then thereby sprout new variants of the coronavirus, which then in turn each require a separate standalone vaccine. Now, give that what it may, we understand that it took upwards of 9 months for us to finally put together a vaccine, which was put together in record time. If a variant like this pops up, and if variants like this pop up, and we are left with no choice but to manufacture vaccines for each and every one of them, we are going to be stuck in a scenario in which the pandemic is the new normal. And by no means is that acceptable. We move on to another horrible story about the pandemic. At the Serum Institute of India, and India's leading developer of the Covaxin as well as the Covishield vaccines, there was a massive fire at the Serum Institute, killing 5 people. But luckily, the authorities reacted in time and no manufacturing delays are currently anticipated. The largest manufacturer of the vaccine in the world. It seems like everything is stacked against us for now. Everything just seems to be going wrong. It's on all the wrong directions. We move on to another horrible story coming out of Baghdad, that there were twin suicide bombings by ISIS. ISIS has openly claimed responsibility of this terror attack, and 32 people have lost their lives, as well as more determination of how many have actually lost their lives or how many have succumbed to the injuries that were implemented. Still too early to tell. Our hearts go out to everyone who lost their lives, the families of those that have lost their lives, as well as everyone who's trying to recover from this horrific accident. And we completely stand against the fact that terrorists believe that they're trying to put across a bigger message by behaving the way that they behave. They need to be hunted down and they need to be dealt with. ISIS was pushed out of Syria. ISIS was pushed out of its stronghold. And now the remaining members of ISIS are trying to fetch some amount of gratification by doing pathetic moves and damaging human lives in the middle of a global pandemic that by no means is excluding them. But you see, people who just want to ensue chaos for self-gratification do not care about the larger scale impact on the global society. We move on to the final story of the day coming out of China, that a new variant of the swine flu virus is now found in pigs in China. China is the world's largest producer of pork, and now with this new variant of the swine flu virus in China makes it starting to deal with an epidemic in the middle of a pandemic. Whether this new swine flu virus can jump species and affect humans is still too early to tell, but the point of the matter is that this variant of swine flu that is now being found in China is a direct result of fake vaccines. Of vaccines that have been duped into play, have been manufactured with no right constituents, have not been cleared by any leading health organization, and instead of just being sold in the black market. This is the world that we're living in, people. There is a lot wrong with the world. There is a lot that keeps happening on a day to day that we have to be aware of. We just hope that the next day, or tomorrow rather, is way better than today was. See you then.